I'm Rabbi Bleiweiss.
Okay, good morning, Yeah. So Baruch Hashem, we actually made it this far.
I always say good morning in Hungarian.
How do you say, do you speak Hungarian?
No.
How do you say hi in Hungarian?
Oh, really? You don't.
I don't know.
Mystery.
Yo, that's $20.
That's it. I'm leaving here in a few
$20.
hours. Not too much hungry for me. Okay.
Nobody heard it.
No, we all heard it.
That's not a joke.
Is this, can you hear me in the back? Yeah, it's good. So welcome. Can I have everybody sit down? This is a different kind of a Derech trip. We haven't done anything like this because, it's funny. People were saying, "Oh, I can't wait. I'm looking forward." That kind of feels weird, right? Because tomorrow morning we're going to the biggest killing grounds in the history of mankind, right? So it's a heavy experience we're going to go to, and the reason why we keep this Tishana Beis and Gimel is because we want to do it in a meaningful, deep way. We're not just shallow travelers here. We're really trying to explore much more than the Holocaust and the centuries upon centuries of persecution. We're really trying to uncover, and this is going to take some work, because you're not going to see a lot of this, but we're really trying to uncover the godless of Torah and the Torah communities that existed here. So that is our objective. We have a lot to do, a lot to say. Look, you're all big. You decide what you want to do in Derech anyway, and everybody's very independent to a fault, but strong encouragement to listen. I have a lot to say, right? You're going to hear from Tomasz, who is a walking encyclopedia. I'll introduce Tomasz in a moment. Rabbi Greenwald, Rabbi Marcus, Rabbi Ornstein, right? People we're going to be talking about heavy things. You should, and you're encouraged to. We're Hamish. It's a small group. You can ask questions. You should ask questions. The harder, the better. Fine. Ask whatever. There are a lot of things that have come out today that are going to bring up deep, heavy questions. It should be an unusual experience. The reason why, and it's hard to capture in words, but for many, many people coming back, they find it is a total game changer in life, going and seeing what we saw. Among other things is that you start realizing all these stories are not just stories, but our ancestors, and it's all of us, doesn't matter if you're Sephardi or Ashkenazi, all of our ancestors, in fact, the people who built up I was telling Rabbi Greenwald, the people who built up Hungary as a Jewish community before the Habsburgs conquered it from the Ottomans were the Sephardi Jews. Hungary is a Sephardi place before it was an Ashkenazi place. So it's all of our people, all of our story, and we're going to try to convey that. Invaluable to the experience. I've come for many years since the late 90s. I've never done a trip in Europe without the expertise of Tomasz. Right? Right, Mamish. So you'll get to know Tomasz is a tremendous figure. Will be a font of information for us and knowledge, and we also, I was able to work together with Tomasz this summer. I guided privately. A wonderful experience then too. Very powerful. So we have two drivers. One is Tobias, and Derech. Derech. Yeah. And you could say in the morning, you could greet them, you say cześć, hi, hello. And you could say dziękuję, that's Polish for thank you, right? And that's pretty much it. I think I just exhausted my Polish.
Dzień dobry.
Oh, dzień dobry. Dzień dobry, yeah. Dziękuję. Okay. Here we are in Hungary. Our schedule is like this. We have a half-hour drive in which I'm going to talk a little bit, but you can ask questions too as we go. I'm going to try to give you an overview. Not everybody attended everything when we gave over to have a sense of what's coming in the next few days. So I'm going to try to reframe that and try to understand what are we going to do. Today is the most intense day, so we kind of have to move. It's a lot to do and a lot of driving, so that we really don't expect to get to our hotel until about midnight. It'd be nice if we got there a little earlier so we get a full night's sleep. But that depends on how, we're always juggling. It's a little less pressure than the coming days, but today just worked out with the itinerary like this. I wouldn't even want to go to Vienna, but that's just out of the question. It's not so far from where we are, but it's just too much in one day. So we're going to be in Budapest. Budapest is it's the biggest it's the biggest center of Jews in Hungary today. It has a deep, long history of the Jewish people. It was once upon a time two cities, Buda and Pest, that combined. And but what there is for us, trying to recreate the world that was of the great Torah centers, you don't see that much today. In Budapest, we're going to see certain Holocaust memorials. There's a famous one by the Danube, and we'll go to, we'll hear a phenomenal story of a very courageous soul named Raoul Wallenberg, and then we'll actually have we have one big meal of the day. We'll eat that in the mid to late afternoon here. We'll have a light meal for dinner, and we're going to daven in a shul that opened in 1902, the largest frum shul in Budapest today. And from there, we're going to what, in my mind, I'm beside myself. I was trying to express it to Rabbi Greenwald a few minutes ago. I'm beside myself with excitement and thrill. I've never been here before, this particular part of Europe. And I knew that the Chassam Sofer was huge. Okay, I knew that part because I quote him virtually every day in different classes. But when I started delving into it, I've been doing a lot of research these last few weeks to prepare. I didn't quite realize the dimensions. So we're going to the Chassam Sofer, and if you catch me shaking as we approach what was once Pressburg, the great yeshiva that he built in the early 1800s, it's now called Bratislava, but when we approach Pressburg, I'm going to start shaking in fear and awe of the Gadlus that was there, of the Gadol who was there, of his family. It's one thing to be a Gadol if you're in one's own lifetime, but he left generations of Gedolim. And we'll see the grave of his son, the Ksav Sofer, right there in Pressburg as well. From Pressburg, we're going on to a place that you've never heard of before called Halashau. But in Halashau, at the very end of his life, very short life, lived one of the great Jews of all time, the Shach. Some of you who Bezras Hashem, thank you for the distinction. So there's Rav Shach, who many of us went to his kever in Bnei Brak, and was the Gadol Hador up until the mamish the turn of the century of this last century. That's one figure. We refer to the Shach that we're visiting today is an abbreviation for the Sifsei Cohen, who lived earlier, and we can't always work out the itinerary with chronology, so you're going to have to be thinking. I encourage you to take notes to keep track of a lot of these details. It'll all come together to form a major narrative. But the Shach is much earlier. He lived in the 1600s, early 1600s, and only 42 years. But he is a giant. Any of you who plan on going on and making your life a life of Torah, Mistama, you'll go to Kollel. If you go to Kollel, most Kollels learn what's Yoredea, Isser V'Heter, which means you'll be spending your days and nights with the Shach and the Taz, his older contemporary. So we'll go to the Shach today. We'll end the day in a town outside of the largest murdering grounds in history. In the city is actually called Auschwitz. It's strange to sleeping in such that we associate Auschwitz with a camp, but it's also a city that existed today. And we're staying in a hotel there. Swiessen. Thank you. All right. In common parlance, it's referred to as Auschwitz. Briefly, for the next few days, just so you know what's going on. We explained this when we got together, but people don't always remember these details. So tomorrow, first thing in the morning, we're going to go to what's called Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was the main killing grounds. And there's we have to do a little shtick there because we don't really want their guides. They're very rigid how they have groups come in. It's cynically maybe a big tourist center, and we want to do it our way. So we're going to go in as individuals and designate a meeting point, and then I'll try to guide and try to tell stories and try to put some perspective in Auschwitz. From Auschwitz, we move. Do we have the people? Everybody has such a thing? Headphones to be able to listen to? If they do, then yeah, that's possible. If you have the technology, I'll speak.
No, they have it up there.
No.
They give it to groups.
No. So then you have to go with them and pay a few $100s, and we're not going to do that. We're going to do our own thing.
We all get on a phone
It's fine.
call.
Yeah. Okay, from there we're going to go to Krakow. The Heilige Krakow, a major Jewish center, the Ramah's Shul, and the basic Faros behind. Almost countless Gedolim lived in Krakow, big center of the Galician Jewish world. Galicia is the South Poland, one of the four lands that was once the center of the Jewish people. And from there we'll go on to a new place we've never been to on this trip. I was there some years ago. A place called Lansut, which has a preserved shul that you don't see. It's a rare shul that still exists today. Quite gorgeous. Brief stop, and we'll end the day by the Noam Elimelech in Lezhensk. And we're going to sleep in Lezhensk, also a first for us. Never slept in Lezhensk before. The next day we'll go to another major center, Lublin. The Yeshiva Chochmei Lublin will visit, the Beis HaKfaros with all the Gedolim, and we'll go to a concentration camp, a killing camp it's right outside of Lublin, the closest to any major city, called Majdanek. From there we'll go to Kutsk and end up the day sleeping in Warsaw. The following and last day, on Thursday, we'll be in Warsaw, and there's plenty to do. Warsaw and Gur and the Beis HaKfaros, and a relatively new, interesting museum, which is a great capper. We haven't done the museum either. The museum really tells the whole history of Poland. So what I'm going to try to do is bombard you with way too much information now. You'll be surprised at how much will go in. Just try to be a sponge and just take it all in, and it'll form a whole picture. And in the end, it'll all be reinforced with the story that the museum tells. And we'll go to Gur, the great Chassidus. We'll go to the Beis HaKfaros, the Chidushei Arim, and the Sfas Emes, and Bezras Hashem get to the airport. That's in a nutshell what we're doing. Yeah, so we're going to be sensitive. Yehuda Gelfand wants to get as much from this trip as the rest of us, and he is a distinguished Kohen. You'll give him when the food comes out, make sure he gets first, right? Kedimus, then we get the mitzvah. Yehuda lets us let him go first, and we should try to help him out as much as can. And he can't come into the cemeteries, he can't come to the last part of Majdanek, and we'll try to be sensitive and keep him as much part of the trip as possible. So, Rav Asher Weiss asks, why do you have to do these trips? What is the purpose of our coming here? I mean, for everything I'm going to tell you, you could read it, you could look it up. I've found some nice sources. I could share whatever books I use to do research. Why actually schlep here? Some people, on principle, Ekroni, they don't want to come to Europe. Hungary was not the same as Slovakia. Slovakia is later today, which is not the same as Poland. Each one has their distinct history with the Jews. None of them favorable. Long before there was a Nazi party, the Jews had been summarily massacred, pillaged, raped, atrocities committed of every kind through every century, virtually every generation that Jews were living here. Less in Poland, really. But in Hungary for sure. Hungary was among the worst during the Holocaust. And some people don't want to come in principle because why give money? Why even pay for anything here? So Rav Asher Weiss gives three answers. I'll open the floor there. What do you say? Before I give you Rav Asher Weiss's answers, what would you say? What's the purpose of coming? Real loud from the back. I don't hear you. Translate, somebody?
Light in the spark.
That's too vague and too Kiruvi sounding.
The feeling. Like you can't get the same feeling from reading the book.
Why do I care about my feel? I'm supposed to feel good? So I should shed a tasteful tear and feel like, oh, I had an experience. It was amazing. That's the gauge of a good experience. Like, oh, wow, it was amazing. You can hear my voice. It's laced with little cynicism on that. Rosh Weiss didn't say that. Meaning we're so used to it, and Derech, we certainly give you this impression that it's all about you and it's all about how you feel and how you experience things because we're a kiruv place and we want you to feel good because we want to help you become from and close to Hashem. You have to realize that there are deeper, more important things we're here in the world for than me and my experience. So then, what are we here for? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm being tough here. I realize that. Yeah, Avisha, what do you say?
I mean, in our generation, we need this.
Our generation, we need it because
we're so detached from.
Yeah,
the
well,
world
that
was.
really relates to all three things. Avishai says certainly.
Also, we're very visual people.
We're
become more visual.
We're very detached emotionally. We kind of hear these things intellectually, but it's very hard to take in and recognize so much of what all these past stories, the bad and the good. The good is phenomenal. It's extraordinary what the Jews created here. Over 1,000 years, they built up one of the most vibrant Torah centers ever of all time, against all the odds, with all the anti-Semitism, right? So, and yet today, we don't realize this. We're so self-absorbed. I can include myself for sure because I'm part of the culture. We just, and I think the first statement I was making about, it's all about me and how I experience it. We don't realize that we're connected to this illustrious, transcendent, eternal people and what we've been through and how proud we should be to be part of this. What do you say, Moshe?
I think the reason why it's important to come and experience this firsthand is because you realize how much the Jews came, how strong we are, and how much.
Right. Well, relating very nicely to what Avisha was just saying, you realize wow, I come from good stock. I have a good pedigree. I'm a Yid, right? And they're all gone, but I'm here. And you start to rise to it. You realize, whoa, it's not a petty life we're living. We're living a life of grandeur, of greatness. And we should all be great. Don't accept mediocrity. It's usher to be mediocre if you're a Jew.
We could hear answers in a couple days.
Yeah, right. It'd be interesting if we rethink this. So I'll give you Rosh Weiss's 3 ideas. He says that we should, and this is hard for us, and Moshe and Avishai were speaking to this, we should identify with and have empathy for Tzarasan Shel Yisrael, the deep suffering of the people. We should feel that. It should be part of us. Moshe Rabbeinu, last week's Parsha, we don't really see so much. Why does Hashem choose him as the Moshiach, as the person who's going to save the Jews? What's on his resume? What are his qualifications for the job? Anybody have an idea? He has this quality, and if you don't know this, please take notes of it. Take notes and learn some things. There's something called being nosa be'olim chavero, to carry the yoke with your friend, which means you have such profound empathy that his problems are your problems. His simcha, it's not like you're going and dancing with your friend at the wedding. No, it's your simcha. You're so other directed. So we should also have that sense. When my history share yesterday at the end of 5:30 shared that the 3 young women were released, so I was mamish and sobs. Right? We should feel that. It should be real. Rav Asher Weiss told us that when we visited him. If you remember last year, he said we should be part of this emotionally. It should naturally enter our tefillas, not as a forced thing, but as something that we care about. So that's one, he says. Number 2, we'll see. There was immense Mesiras Nefesh. That means total self-sacrifice and devotion to mitzvahs, to Torah, to learning, to chesed. Many of the communities, a few of you were with us last year. We went to Tiktin, a preserved city. They were poor in Tiktin, but they all did chesed for everybody. Nobody was when they made a wedding. Somehow they had the money to do it because everybody kicked in a little bit, right? There was tremendous Mesiras Nefesh. We should connect to that. And I would rate this very high on my list. I don't know exactly how to rank these 3 things, but this one probably is first. And that is Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. The pasuk says in Shmuel, the eternity of the Jews doesn't lie. We are part of the most extraordinary people to walk the planet. Our history, and those of you who've gone through all of history, their narrative arc with me or with anybody else, appreciates this. Our history is quite a ride, quite extraordinary on every level. Nisim niflaos, from the get-go, from the Avos to Yetzias Mitzrayim, to the Spanish expulsion and Inquisition, to the Chmielnitsky massacres that we'll discuss later today, to Majdanek, to the Vad Arba Haratzos, the Council of the 4 Lands that they created for a little window of time, not quite a couple hundred years, between the 1500s and the 1700s, when the Jews had their own semi-autonomous reign. They could be independent, and they built up Torah then. And we're going to hear against the odds how the Jews did it. And we're the next step, and we have to connect ourselves in that big narrative and realize that we have a lot to rise to. That's where Rav Asher Weiss formulates the purpose, and it is powerful. And you're right when you say it's all about emotion. We should rise to it, and that's going to be an avoda. We have to work to understand that.
The first one was what?
The first one was Tzarasan Shel Yisrael. You should identify with the pain of the Jews. The other one is the second one is Mesir that's being nosable. That's part of being nosable. The second one is to recognize the Mesiras Nefesh of the Jews through all time, to Hashem, to His Torah, to His mitzvahs, to saving other Jews when times were bad. And the third one is Nitzchius. Realize we're part of this history. So here we are. Here we're in Hungary. Hungary, I mentioned. Hungary, actually, the Jews were coming here for over 1,000 years. We have records of Jews that were here. There's, in reading up, I saw in the 1200s, there were all kinds of things going on historically that were very ominous. And the Mongols were invading from the east, and they came and captured Palestine, as it was called, Eretz Yisrael. And they thought perhaps that was Milchemes Gog and Magog, and the community at large in Hungary felt Mashiach was around the corner. They felt. And didn't quite happen apparently. But in these days when you're reading about the Yidden, there's no reform movement, there's no secularism, everybody's holding, everybody's connected to Hashem, everybody's learning Torah and keeping mitzvos. When the Spanish Jews were kicked out of Spain in 1492, one of the destinations was Central Eastern Europe. Not just Hungary, but also Poland. And so they were among the foundation of the later community in this region. There's a family called the Habsburgs that conquered this territory from the Ottomans. The Ottomans were the Turks, the Turkish power, and they took over. And once upon a time, the map has shape-shifted a lot over history. The different districts were different countries. In my own lifetime, Czechoslovakia became Czech Republic and Slovakia, two different countries. Right? Everything is constantly in flux. So once upon a time, it was called the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Was a vast empire, including major cities, all of which Jews lived in, such as Vienna and Prague, and with great illustrious rabbis in all of these places, and Budapest, and later Pressburg. And something happened in Hungary that was ominous, seemingly positive, but a little bit nerve-wracking. There was a big anti-Semitic empress named Maria Theresa. Okay, a bunch of interesting stories with her and the notable Yehuda. Then she dies, and her son Joseph becomes the new emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is much larger than today's Austria or Hungary. And he issues in 1780 for the first time something called the Edicts of Tolerance. Jews are watching. Seems kind of nice. They have new opportunities to pursue different professions that were closed to them previously. They were welcome to come to university, something that was not an option previously. It draws more Jews to come to this area because there are more liberal policies, so it's easier to live in such a place, yeah? But it's a little bit ominous and worrisome. They don't want Jews speaking Hebrew or Yiddish. They want them to speak Hungarian. The Tanakh is translated into Hungarian. These are the days in Germany right next door. All these places are very poor. There's a lot of mobility between Germany and Poland and Hungary during this period. So in Germany right next door, you had a figure named Moses Mendelssohn, who's considered the father of the Jewish Enlightenment, who held himself to be a from Shomer Shabbos person, Shomer Torah Mitzvahs person till the end, but he had new ideas. He said, we keep all the Torah of the Jews, Mendelssohn said. Who knows about Mendelssohn? Okay, so we keep all the Torah of the Jews, yeah, except those things that are not really, you can't understand rationally. Those things can go, but that's fine. He felt was just a minority. His ideas fell on very eager ears of the Jews around, because the Jews now confronted with new opportunities. Hey, maybe we can get past centuries of persecution and poverty and misery, and we could just make it with the Goyim. And now Mendelssohn is telling us there's a way you could actually go to university, learn all these other ideas, and still you could do the Jewish thing, when you need to quell your guilty conscience. And anybody hears what's coming from this? Mendelssohn would have bristled if you would have called him the founder of the Reform movement, but that's exactly what he was. Mendelssohn had 6 children, 4 of them outright converted to Christianity. He wore tzitzis. He davened mincha till the end of his life with a minyan. If he would have known what his ideas would lead to, but they learned what their father was teaching them, and they said, hey, if it's all about integration in society, you could still be a Jew, but you could integrate much better if you're not a Jew. So let's just become Christian altogether. He had a very famous grandson who was one of the famous classical composers named Felix Mendelssohn. He had one grandson who was still identifiably Jewish, and that was it. His family went off and all intermarried. It's self-imposed kares. From this came the Reform movement. Now, Reform started in Germany, but it found a very, very welcome home in Hungary. And so when we go to our next stop to Bratislav, which is, we'll call it Pressburg from now on, when we go to Pressburg, we tell the story of the giant of the Chassam Sofer, who's really the first major gigantic figure in the Torah world to take on reform. And we'll talk about how he did that. Very, very, very unusual how he did it, and not entirely successfully. I mean, with great courage and bravery. It's attributed to the Chassam Sofer. It's a question if he actually ever said it, but he said, Chadash asur min Torah. All these new ideas that are brewing in and around Hungary. He said all these things. You know what Chadash is?
What's new with you, Rabbi?
Well, then ask me. Chadash?
Rabbi, what's Chadash?
Not much. What's new with you? Chadash is in Parshas Emor. It's a prohibition of eating the new grain until we bring the Korban Omer. We made the Beis Hamikdash, and until the second day of Pesach passes today. Nowadays, Chadash asur min Torah is, we know technically that what's new, what's Chadash is indeed a Torah prohibition, but what he's playing on words, because all rabbis make puns, you know that, is he's actually saying that things that are new are now questionable and need to be reevaluated. Chassam Sofer was a fierce defender of Minhag Yisrael. If the Jews, not just D'Oraisos and D'Rabbanans, but if the Jews had a custom to do something, that becomes halacha. He said it takes on the force of a neder D'Oraisa, of a vow, like wearing a kippah. Wearing a kippah is a custom. 500-600 years ago, not every Jew wore a head covering. Today, he held that a Jew who walked, Chassam Sofer held that if a Jew walked Dalet Amos, 4 of these, from the finger to the elbow, 4 of those without a kippah on his head, he called him a poshea, a chatzuf, a sinner and somebody with chutzpah, right? And he held that something like that held the force of a neder d'oraisa and should not be sacrificed, even who's learning chavtes in Kiddushin. So even when if your parent says, "Hey kid, kibbut avim is a major obligation. Hey kid, you embarrassed me in front of my friends. Take off your kippah." What do you do? So you can't listen if he tells you to violate Shabbos. You can't listen if he tells you to violate the Rabbanon. Chassam Sofer says if he tells you to violate a widely kept minhag, you can't listen. Respectfully, you say, "I'm sorry, sir, I have to keep a kippah on my," but you cannot listen to him because it's got the force of a neder, on a vow, on a Torah level, which has great implications. All this is happening. Meanwhile, in the background, another story that we're going to come to tell in the coming days about another revolution simultaneous with reform, with the Enlightenment, was a revolution within the religious world called Chassidus, with that also spawned a massive negative backlash called the Misnagdim. It's a very tumultuous period for the Jews. We'll try to elaborate on all of these things. I'm saying this by way of introduction. And what we'll be focusing on in the next couple minutes is a much more contemporary chapter. The Jews, they divided into 3 groups essentially from the 19th century, from the days of the Chassam Sofer. You have the Chassam Sofer, whose influence is immense till today. Let me just give you a sense of how amazing and how intense his influence is. I mean, just for myself, are you with me? Can you listen to this? I knew the Chassam Sofer was huge. That's no big deal. But now that I'm researching it, I did this project. I have many hundreds of files in my computer. I've been collecting for years. Other people have train sets. I have files. So I just cherry picked. I did a search. Every place that says Chassam Sofer, and I pulled up whatever halachas it was, and it occurred to me, never occurred to me until this, how much every day I'm quoting him. Almost like Rav Moshe Feinstein. He's just a figure who's so dominant in our lives in the greatest way. So you have him, and then what he spawned, which is the Pressburg Yeshiva. From Pressburg, you have the Ksav Sofer, his student, Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, who went on to found an organization called the Eda Charedis. Eda Charedis, you think of the world of Meir Sharim, the Ungarian, the Hungarian influence on life in Eretz Yisrael is immense. Very much because of the Chassam Sofer. That sense of uncompromising clinging to Hashem and rejection of things that are modern is the Chassam Sofer, because the recognition that if you compromise, you can't sustain it in the modern world. There's too much temptation.
Very much about the dress of a
The dress of a Yid, very much put on women's sneers, on that the payos should be, the sideburns should be just the right, covering the entire cheekbone. Very, very careful, right? From the, who comes from the Chassam Sofer ideologically, right in our backyard? Dushinsky. The Dushinsky we think of as Hasidus, but they weren't Hasidim when they were in Hungary. They were simply disciples of the Chassam Sofer. Preshburg, the great yeshiva, transferred. It's not so successful today, not so large, but you can still see the building over in Kiryat Moshe, not far from the bus station. Anybody who went to Nate's a couple weeks ago by the Kosel? A few of you went to Nate's, yeah? So did you make a Kiddush afterwards? Do they have the Kiddush still where you go behind, right behind the Kosel, there's the arches, you go to the Muslim corner, you go up the stairs, and right there there's a Kiddush, sort of a level above the Kosel. That was actually purchased in the 1800s by the students of the Chassam Sofer, that area, turned into a shul called the Ohel Yitzchak Shul, which was destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt. And recently, in the last couple of decades, it was revitalized as well. I'm saying all this just to give you a sense of the influence of these figures. The Chassam Sofer's son, Rav Shimon Sofer, founded the first Torah political party called Machzikei Hadas. Today we know of Machzikei Hadas as a hechsher, and that's because they merged with Belz, which is a Hungarian Hasidus. But it was the first political party before the Agudas Yisrael, before the Eda Haredis. So you had the Chassam Sofer, and those people who were not compromising and clinging to Hashem. Then you had, in Hungary, they called it the Neolog, which was the reform movement in Hungary. Neo, new, log is logic, new ideas. And they were radical. They were really at the forefront of the new reform movement, very impactful. And people, reform is very much like throwing the arrow and drawing the bullseye. They wanted the lifestyle, and reform gave them a way to do that. Then you had, this is to me very interesting piece of this, you had a bunch of Jews who didn't want to take sides. I love everybody, I don't like conflict, people like this. I don't want to get involved. They called themselves the status quo, and they tried to stay neutral. There were big arguments between the Chassam Sofer and then on the one side and his group, and the Neolog on the other side, and the status quo wanted to stay neutral. Do you know what happened to the status quo? What would you guess?
They got killed.
No, well, okay. Well, I haven't got to persecution. I'm just talking about religiously right now. They're gone. They also slipped into reform. Because if you're not consciously trying to serve Hashem, especially in the modern world with all of its temptations, very hard to sustain anything. There was richness of life here. There was Torah learning was in the streets. People would talk it in the marketplace. There's no such thing as small talk between these kinds of Jews. They were always in the sugya. They always had their head in the parsha, somewhere in the Tanakh. In Preshburg, some of the things the yeshiva taught, very unusual in the yeshiva world, they taught Tanakh. Right? We don't have that today so much. Any yeshivas teach Tanakh that we know of? Any distinguished, important yeshivas? I don't think so. Tanakh, the Torah, Nivim, Ksuvim, they knew it. They studied Hebrew grammar. He taught public speaking because he felt that every yeshiva student should go out and teach and be a speaker and be makarev. The yeshiva was open to the common folk. You didn't have to get in to be an official student. The exams were really intense, but the doors were open.
What was the reason he gave for learning Tanakh?
He said it's part of our heritage. It's central. If you don't know Tanakh, you're not a Yid. That was always the case. Once upon a time, you could see in the way that Tanakh is quoted in the Gemara before Rav Yehoshua Boaz gave us the Torah or commentary that filled in the Psukim. The Gemara is just constantly quoting half Psukim, assuming that you, dear reader, can finish the second half of the pasuk. Because once upon a time, we knew it. We could.
So what changed? Why don't we study it?
There's several answers, possible answers. We're not quite sure. We moved away from that. Part of it was sustaining Torah. We're kind of on a downhill slope, declining as Jews. Sustaining what we call the minimal shas and poskim, just learning the basic Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos, and the major ideas in halacha, the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, and the basic commentaries, itself is seen as such a central, important task that other things seem to have fallen off to the wayside. There's also a possibility that since the Protestant Revolution, when Martin Luther translated the Tanakh into German, the Christian Bible into German, that the Christian world became associated with learning the Tanakh, and Jews stayed clear of it, not wanting to be associated with them in any which way, which might explain something.
Rav Chaim Volozhin didn't influence the Chassam Sofer to think otherwise, or was he going against Chaim Volozhin?
They were contemporaries, Rav Chaim Volozhin, but they didn't. I don't know if they had such interaction in different parts of the world. Volozhin is way north of even Vilna, where we were last year.
But his mahalach in the yeshiva wasn't that.
Was not that. No. Volozhin was a different mahalach. More what I was saying, Shas and Poskim and Rambam.
Chassam Sofer went against it.
No, it wasn't a rebellion. They were just different centers. They were in different places.
There's also a way of going against the reform. Knowing more, Jew knowing more.
Yeah.
Knowing
Okay.
the basics.
Fine. The image I'm trying to create, though, is that even though they were uncompromising in keeping Torah, they were the most accessible people. You know, the Chassam Sofer, he told the students they have to go out and do kiruv and teach Torah. The yeshiva doors were open to anybody, anytime. He himself, his home was open to anybody who had a shaila, and people took advantage of his offer. And they came, and the biggest shailas and the smallest shailas, he was patient and kind. He was somebody, and you see this. I read many descriptions about him. What comes through, and it's maybe you think, okay, everybody says that about a gadol, but so many people said it that you can tell it's a real quality. He was incredibly warm. He was the most down-to-earth, easygoing kind of a personality. He started, his mentors were two great Rabbanim, both in Nigla and Nistar, both in the revealed Torah and the hidden Torah, that was called Kabbalah. He studied with Rav Nosson Adler, major figure, and he studied by the Haflah, who became a chassid in Frankfurt, of all places. There were Pinchas Harwitz. What did you learn something in the Haflah? Oh, the Maknes, Avery Maknes, also Rabbi Pinchas Harwitz, yeah. So these were his rebbes, and the particularly Rav Nosson Adler was somebody of great controversy because he was unique and he did his own thing. He davened Sephardi Nusach in Germany. They were in Frankfurt at the time, and a lot of other things that were just a little bit offsetting for people. So it's striking how the Chassam Sofer, as close as he was with his Rebbe, was somebody who really, except for his conflict with the Reform and the emerging Enlightenment here, but he was somebody that even the Reform had to love because of his personality. The Reform tried to paint all religious Jews as backwards and dirty and smelly and uncivilized. Well, they just couldn't peg that on the Chassam Sofer. He was so refined and so kind and such a good person and so always impeccably dressed. Somebody's going to say something? Yeah?
Is this the other Rav Pinchas Horowitz? Is he related to the Basseter Horowitzes?
Don't think so. Horowitz is a very, very common Jewish name.
How would you define impeccably dressed?
I don't know. How would I define impeccably dressed? Probably relative to their cultural setting. But he was not a Slav. He looked put together. Look, in Hilchos Deos in the Rambam, it says, and it's subjective, obviously, right? It depends on the culture you're part of. But in Hilchos Deos, it says that a Rav should conduct himself with a certain elegance, a certain dignity. That's how he should appear to people. The Chassam Sofer was never without his jacket. He was refined. He didn't go overboard. Nothing fancy. Just a classy person. And the Reform just, hated that because they couldn't make fun of him. Yeah. Budapest today is obviously it's an appealing city. People were noting in the airport, how come people seem mean here? I wouldn't take a couple interactions as necessarily indicative of a whole society, but there is something maybe European. There sometimes, especially coming from America or Eretz Yisrael, it doesn't have the same warmth perhaps that we're used to. With regards to the Hungarians and the Jews in general through history, I think I mentioned that there was almost no generation that didn't know some kind of persecution, a pogrom. There were several points where the Jews were expelled from cities and sometimes whole districts. There are a lot of different groups, a lot of places in this area that are grouped together. There's a place called Moravia. There's Bavaria. Sometimes they're Germany. Sometimes they're part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. today they've been subsumed in different places, but the general treatment of the Jews was outrageous throughout their stay here, and really for however it worked out in Hashem's plans, the Hungarian Jews managed to survive the worst part of the Holocaust until the end. But the Nazis came with a vigor. They were losing. The Nazis were just about to implode. They could have invested their resources in defending themselves, but they were so singularly focused on destroying the Jewish people that they decided to destroy the Hungarian Jewish world. And what we're about to see is a memorial, a relatively new one, I think from 2006, that was put up artistically. One of the massacres that took place where Jews were simply shot and their bodies dropped into the Danube to our left over here. When people say that it was only Hitler and the Nazis, we don't realize that you had an entire continent that was on board. They took off their shoes as a symbolic of that, because shoes are valuable. They also grabbed gold fillings from their mouths while they were still alive without anesthesia. They much of the continental Europe made a big profit on the Jews, and this was a massacre that took place in late Holocaust period, 1944. We date the Holocaust from, how do we know how to date it? We haven't even talked about the names of this experience, the Holocaust, the Shoah, but let's say we start with Blitzkrieg and the conquering of Poland in September 1st, 1939, which is usually how they date the beginning of World War II, and it ends with the liberation of the camps in 1945. So 1944 is already near the end, and they were focusing on destroying the great Jewish world of Hungary, centered in Budapest. We'll get off?
No, it's 4 minutes.
4 minutes away.
We'll explain the difference.
What's that?
What's here, what's there, or
Anything to say? You want to get on?
top of it.
So Hungary was actually ally of Nazi Germany, but till 1944 the situation of Jews was not so bad as in other countries. Actually, only small percent of Jews were physically persecuted. That changed on I think 19th of March 44, when the German troops entered this country, and within a few days they occupied it, and it was the beginning of the Holocaust. And there were at least two stages. One stage was all the ghettoization, creating of first Jewish council called the Judenrat, and assembling the Jews cramping them in very bad conditions, and putting them on the trains. That happened to the Jewish communities outside Budapest, and in 59 days more than 4,000 Jews were deported, mostly to Auschwitz. And but the persecutions were the Jews of Budapest were saved from those persecutions, and only after 15th of October 44, with the coup led by a leader of the Nazi party, Hungarian Nazi Party, Szalawski, the real persecution of Budapest Jews started. And
what do we see here?
Different. We are first of all we see the river called Danube. It's the major river of Europe, and we are in the Pest area. The opposite side is Buda. Pest,
which is not connected to an Oriental religion. Buda, it's spelled.
And most Jews lived in Pest. Yeah, that was even anti-Semitic pun or invented by a Jew hater, mayor of Vienna, who called Budapest, instead of Budapest, Budapest. You know why? Because there were so many Jews here, like quarter of the population almost were Jewish. Before there were 220,000 Jews. So we are in Pest, and majority of the Jews of Budapest lived in this area in Buda. And Buda was also liberated 3 weeks before Pest was. Pest was liberated 3 weeks before Buda, and now we can walk. We are very close to the memorial. So Jews, there were two ghettos. That's important to understand. One was called International Ghetto. We'll speak later about that, and the major ghetto. And within the last 2 months of the Nazi occupation, December and 44, January 45, thousands of Jews were grabbed, were grabbed and brought to this place and shot dead. There were some rare cases, people survived, those who fainted or wounded, rare cases, but majority were shot dead. And before, it was also degradation. Okay.
שבאים ושרים